Okay, welcome back. And as promised, we're going to pick up right where we left off. We were down here at work year execution. So this is kind of like a bottom line number. Given all the information we've given this tool so far, what do we expect our total fiscal year consumption to be? Which would be 263.19. We know that we're funded at 260 total, so or 260 right here. So that means that our work year delta is that we're scheduled to over execute by 3.19 work years at this point, or 101% of our funded amount. So that means that in terms of decision support, we need to go talk to somebody about, do we expect more LWOP or LAPS to be generated to bring these numbers down? Or do we need to potentially remove some temps or something like that? So that's that bottom line number that all kind of culminates from adding in projections for hiring and people leaving, LWOP, awards, non R60 expenses. All that stuff comes down into these bottom line numbers. Execution by type employee. Now this is kind of a quick look. It looks right into the data. It just looks into this R60 data tab, and obviously we know how many we have funded. We've seen that a few times, and then it looks into here and it goes MRV work years. It just looks for every employee that's not ESP coded or temp coded, such that if you happen to code your perms, your permanent employees, in terms of civ pay, this number may not be right. But if you're just letting the cards fall where they may in terms of your civ pay, ESP coded employees are for ESP funding, and temp positions are being coded properly, then that's the expected execution for your perms. And right now this is accurate because we're in the middle of an RCP, so we're not executing fully for our permanent employees. NGB ESP temps, we also know that in terms of here we have some ESP coded employees, but we need to go back and, as we spoke about before, fix DSIPs, and then make sure as all part of that 3821 process, we need to make sure that we're coding them properly on the front end. So it is giving me an indicator here for if things are happening the way I would expect them to happen. And then here, temps from LAPS. Now we don't have any bulk temps, but from last fiscal year, knowing that we had an RCP coming up, knowing that we were sending people away for 6 months before this fiscal year happened, we kept temps on board because that's something we knew we could do. And we may have to make decisions later in the year to make sure that we're inside of our numbers here, assuming that my projections are right. But so for my site picture, this is a quick snapshot, and it all makes a lot of sense to me. And it looks like it should. We're not funded, but we are executing temps. Exactly right. We have a few NGB funded ESP coded temps, but we're not showing execution in the data. Well, that means we need to go and work with our folks to make sure that the lines of accounting are corrected and show properly. And then MRV's full-time employee execution. We do have hours remaining, so we talk a lot about work year execution or things in terms of work years, and then we look at dollars, obviously, but cradle to grave here, everything's generated based on hours worked. So I work 80 hours, I go into ATAPS. ATAPS generates a file, gets loaded for the pay cycle. It's all driven based upon each individual employee working creditable hours. So you'll see that in the projection adjustments, where we see that hourly execution as well, but that's in there for you to take a look at. What if hiring outlook? Certain points in the year, it really doesn't make any sense, but at other points it may make a lot of sense, and it's just a quick what if. And that what if is based upon your projected delta. So if you're projecting that you're over executing, then you're going to need to you can't hire anybody. You need to actually get rid of some people. Additional work years from UFers. Let's say we said we're not going to do any type of unfunded requests at all. then how many work years could we get from that? In this case, as it turns out, it would kind of be a wash, right? So depending on your situation and time of year, that's just a quick what if with these assumptions. And then funding requirements, you can see this huge negative numbers. We're just projecting what we think it's going to be this earlier in the year. It's just really tough to tell, but we're putting a projection out there, and then we're saying where we are in terms of our actual authority. And as you add authority here to your current fiscal year, this will adjust. And then when you get way to the end of the year in the September timeframe, when NGB starts to do their projections and gives you your final funding document for Civ Pay, it's going to be a lot more meaningful. LSL pay to date, since that's an NGB funded item, we look at the aggregate, we do a straight line and say, well, if every pay period had this much LSL, then that's what we would be at, so that we can keep our eyes on it with respect to receiving a funding document not only for our current fiscal year Civ Pay program, but then a line item funding this amount as well. NGB does see these things, so typically you're going to be really close on your LSL. Now, we're going to move into the part that makes this a great analysis and decision support tool, because in a perfect world, if we just loaded data, we're going to do our data connection, we're going to come in at R60, we're going to reset it, take it back to home station, and just pull in what's happened. And in a perfect world, nobody takes LWOP, nobody leaves, nobody gets hired, everything's great. Then we can just take these numbers and assume that they're going to be the same always. We know that's not the case, because reality says that we're going to be sending people out to do theater security packages. We're going to be sending people on these RCPs to different parts of the world where they're going to use their mill leave, right? They're going to use annual leave potentially. And then once they're done doing that, so they might not start LWOP as soon as they actually leave, right? So we need to be able to adjust for the lapse generated by, whether it's by permanent or temp hirings. So if I leave and go to another position, is my position going to be filled immediately? Well, no, it just doesn't work that fast. There are natural frictions that take place that require time. Temp's the same in terms of backfilling. It takes time to backfill, potentially based upon how quickly the state can generate a new employee into your organization. So, and then LWOP as well, the member being gone for multiple pay periods or just individual things. Let's say there's maternity leave and the employee is going to be gone for 2 pay periods. Can I put in just that amount for that particular employee, since I know it's happening, and then account for and project for the lapses generated by that? So that's what this projection assumptions tab is all about. What we're seeing here, and I'll kind of give a quick overview. If you're familiar with Civ Pay, a lot of these things are going to be familiar. If you're not familiar at all with Civ Pay, you're going to want to kind of stare at this for a while and get a good feel for it. Pay period start and ending. So 1 October of whatever year is the first day we can charge anything to the appropriation, and then we have an actual pay period, first pay period end, and I've titled this first pay period end, which actually refers back to this first pay period ended. So what I did in this cell, and we'll do a quick, hey, this is Excel, I can select in the cell, and in this box here I can type in, which is exactly what I did, first pay period end with underscores in between, so that instead of referencing cell C13 every single time and putting dollar signs and everything, what I can do is type in first pay period end, and it's going to know that. And in this drop down list you can see the names I gave to either ranges or cells in the workbook. So we do that to make it a little easier on us, and then to make it make sense to you when you look at it. Hopefully you see these calculations and go, oh, okay, it's this element plus this element, not C12 plus C13. Nobody knows what that is. So it's going to update. Once you update in the front page, it'll update the remainder of these. You can see that there's a formula tied to this cell here, and it'll update down the road. We do have a blank row in FY17 because it ends on 30 September. We have 80 hours in the first and last pay period, so that's kind of cool. But we do have it set up for 27 pay periods because most of the times we do have fractional amounts. Work years remaining. Now what this is it's just a function of how much more time do we have left in the year, how many hours are in a work year. So first pay period, if I'm going to start here, that's one work year. Work the entire, every single pay period, every hour. So if I were to be hired right here for the rest of the year, then that's going to be an entire work year executed. As we move down, because this year is as perfect as it is in terms of symmetry, halfway through, if I get hired, that's a half a work year. So if I get hired, these two guys here that I put in, I hired two people. Those two people are each going to execute a half a work year because we started at the halfway point, culminating in 2 full work years, right? Half plus a half again. So that's columns A through D so far. So what this is where the power lies. Now, I will be honest with you, we haven't locked down any of our products or tools so far, and what we are going to do in this one is protect this sheet. So to do that, we highlighted these, right-clicked, and format cells, and then protection, and we make sure these are unlocked. We unchecked it. It used to be checked. We unchecked it so that you could add things to these cells. The remainder of the sheet is going to be locked. Now, we're not going to apply a password because I firmly believe in you being able to get in here, dig in, put a copy on your desktop, break it, fix it, learn how it all works. You got to be able to do that. So if you want to unprotect it and then really see what's going on or whatever, by all means go ahead and do that, but it's going to be protected out of the box because some of these formulas that start referencing multiple things or start doing other math or referencing to other columns and the one above it, we just want to make sure that they can't be broken easily. So that's all that is. Now let's walk through this. How does this work? We see work year consumption plus or minus. We see these extrapolations. I've got funded levels, actuals, projections. So let's delete this and kind of basically take this thing through the smell test. Does it pass the smell test for what should be happening? First of all, what we're seeing here is these first several work periods. So the way this is set up in the background, there's simply a conditional formatting measure that says if today's date is past the end of the pay period, then make this blue. And then also in this formula it says I don't want to see anything that's past the last pay period that was executed, because whether we've pulled the data in or not, we can't affect that prior pay period anymore. It's done. So it won't be added into our consumption. We'd like to know what the actuals would be for the entire fiscal year right up front so we could just plan for it. The reality is we don't know what they are. When the actuals come in, we use the actuals as we see here, and then we project from there. So anything that's happened in the past doesn't affect anything anymore. We just look forward, which is why these are yellow. In this template, everything that's yellow you can put something in there to affect the projection. So let me add a permanent hire right here. I'm going to this is in terms of one person starting on the first pay period. Can you do so? I'll backtrack here in a second, but there we got one person. That's the fraction of a work year that they're going to work. Work year equivalence is right here. It gets added down here into what filters into that front page for this. So 0.85, that's where that comes from. It rounds up to 2 decimal places. Now what happens in terms of our projections is that, let's take a look here. This line all the way to the across, and when you get this template, play with it a little bit, adjust it, make sure it makes sense to you. If we hire an employee right here, that employee is going to work presumably 80 hours for the rest of the year. So when we add one here, it adds that 80 hours on down the line from the prior pay period. That's what it should do, because it's going to affect every pay period moving forward. In terms of work years, you see it went from 9.73 to 9.77, and then it stays at 9.77 because that's the only projected value that we've given it. Let's say that a few pay periods later, only one employee comes back off the books. So again, this one employee is now no longer going to do 80 hours, so it's going to take that back off of there. So we increased 80 hours, and that stayed the same until this employee retired. Let's say he retired. Comes back to actually that same 20,239 amount. That's what we would expect to happen. So in between here, and then the work years changed back as well for this simple example. But what we would expect here in between there is that it actually consumed work years, right? We added one, and then 3 pay periods happened, and then 1 came off in this pay period projected. So there is going to be consumption of work years. There's going to be execution of work years. If we reverse that situation and 1 came off and then we added 1, let's say it took 3 pay periods to replace this person after they retired, there's going to be lapse generated. 1.115 work years of lapse was generated in between this guy retiring and this person coming on to fill back into that position. The reason why there's lapse generated is because at this point in the year it was 0.846 work years, but when they came back on it was 0.731. So the difference there becomes the lapse generated. So that's how the permanent employees change. We do allow for you to add in terms of fractionals. So if you start on the Monday in between, but not the pay period that starts the Monday that starts the pay period, you can put 1.5. I know a lot of HRs do not like to do this, but as far as I know, it is completely legitimate. So we do allow that. If you were to put in some ridiculous amount on accident, like 200, we're going to have a screen that pops. So it must be a whole number between -100 and 100. To adjust, go to review and protect the sheet, data validation. That's how you adjust these controls. Temp changes is the same exact thing. So we put in here, let's say we hired 20 temps. And then immediately it's going to say that's 16.923 work year equivalents based upon this. And then in our projections it adds those hours and expects that those will continue until we come here and we say, sorry guys, got to let you go, we way overdid it. We have consumption. It comes back to what we would expect it to. So it's adjusting that way. Here's an important one that does give a lot of flexibility, but it takes a little time. And we're going to get into this one when we come back because the video is getting a little long. See you then.